Well, thank you. Sego Seguego, Kimberly Murray, Yungats Ganye Gahaga, Ne Ganasatage Wakwaho. Thank you to the Indigenous Students Law Association for inviting me today, and thank you so much for the wonderful award. I really appreciate it. You know, I would never have thought, looking back at my long history of going to law school back in 1990, and let me tell you, I hated law school, that I would be doing the type of work that I've been doing over the last 25 years, and meeting the wonderful people and having these opportunities to really learn from community members and elders. So I thank you for that. I am going to put a PowerPoint up, so you don't have to look at my ugly face the whole time I'm talking. So just bear with me while I figure out how to do this. You'd think after 2 years I'd be an expert at it, but there we go.
Perfect.
It works. Everyone can see. Great. I introduced myself to you in Mohawk. I am a language learner, and I've been learning Ganya Gahaga for the last 2 years. And as you all know, the elders tell us to use our words when we can. I told you I'm Mohawk Ganasitage, and I'm Wolf Clan. I actually have the enormous honor and privilege to be working with the Survivors Secretariat, who are the survivors of the Mohawk Institute that was at Six Nations of the Grand River for 136 years. They've asked me to come on and help them with the search that they're doing on the grounds of the Institute, and a number of really important things that that they've identified as what they want to accomplish. And so before I get into speaking about the history, I just, you know, always want to be mindful of the content of the material. You know, it's always difficult to talk about people and spirits of little children that are missing, and I encourage everyone to take the time and do what you need to keep yourself healthy and take care of your hearts as we talk about this important journey that the survivors have entrusted me to go on with them. I will talk about the logo at the end of my talk if I have time, but it's a brand new logo. You're probably one of the first group of people that are seeing it. The survivors just approved it about 2 weeks ago. So you'll see it throughout my presentation because I'm getting used to using it, and it's just the story that it tells is quite unique, and hopefully I'll have some time at the end to talk about it. So before we get going, about the Secretariat, I mentioned the Mohawk Institute. It is the first Indian residential school in Canada and is the longest operating Indian residential school. So it operated for 136 years. This is a picture of the Institute. It still stands. It's in Brantford, Ontario, which is Six Nations territory. We know that over, the slide's a little outdated now, we know that over 24 First Nations communities in Quebec and Ontario had their kids apprehended and taken to the Mohawk Institute. Each year the school had approximately 100 to 130 children that were being detained in the residential school. There's over 500 acres of land associated with the grounds, and I'll talk a bit about that in a bit. I do want to just let you know, the school, when it first opened, and you know, when I say school, just, you know, everyone picture me putting air quotes as I say it. First started as a day school in 1828 and started to board children in around 1834. And it didn't close until 1970-71 in that year. So it's, you know, 136 years of boarding children, but the actual institute was operating for 142 years. There's more than one building. This building that you see in this picture is the second building that was built. The first one was actually burnt down by children. I hope one day that there's a story told about those brave 16 boys that came together from a number of different communities that actually tried to put a stop to this institute and burn down many number of their structures. You know, a number of them were actually charged with arson and were put into detention facilities. And one, in fact, actually went to the Kingston Penitentiary, if you could believe it or not. But there's quite a story to tell about that first building. Oh, it's not changing now, guys. Oh, there we go. Did that work?
Yeah, if it does it, you just have to click on the slide because it lost focus if you click on the Zoom window. It's that kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that help.
No
So as everyone knows, when the recovery of children was announced by Tk'emlúps last summer or last spring, a group of survivors that had been meeting at Six Nations of the Grand River for a number of years came together to talk about what they wanted to do around the grounds of the Mohawk Institute. And here's a photograph of a few of them at a press conference that we held in the fall. And they came together to talk about you know, how to approach the grounds of the Mohawk Institute, but more importantly, also to talk about what more can they do around the legacy that they want to see for their children, their grandchildren, and for the community in relation to the institute that's still in their territory. It's now a museum, and there's a Save the Evidence campaign that has been operating around the institute, and some restoration is happening with the building after consulting with the community. But the survivors really decided that, you know, it's not enough just to do the search of the grounds. There's a lot more information on collecting history that needs to happen around the Mohawk Institute. And so through a number of meetings, they determined that they wanted to create a secretariat to do a number of things within their mandate area. And so, you know, they did all this work was done before they hired me in August. So this is amazing work that they accomplished last summer. They decided that the secretariat would have some guiding principles, and first and foremost is that it be survivor-led. And so, you know, a lot of discussion has been happening about what does that mean to be survivor-led, and for these survivors in particular at the Mohawk Institute, survivor-led to them means that they are leading it. They are on the board of directors of the Survivor Secretariat. They are making every decision as we proceed with the work that we have to do on searching on the grounds. They decide what machines we buy, what companies we hire, who we train, who we don't train, and you know, what records we go for, who we take funding from, who we don't take funding from. Everything is being decided by the survivors, and we currently have just incorporated the Secretariat, and they have a posting up for boards of directors for the organization, and have made it clear that it is going to be survivors that will be on the board of directors. They have invited intergenerational survivors to apply, but priority will be given to survivors first. And we have heard from the survivors that you know, sometimes they don't feel that their voices are heard, and that intergenerational survivors sometimes are so protective of their loved ones and their family that they feel that they're voiceless. And so we want to be sure that we're hearing from the survivors directly. They said that they would be trauma informed, and you know, that you know, what does that mean? And you know, everyone uses the term these days, and we get a lot of pressure as a secretariat to get out there and share information with people. And, you know, to the point where like I'm being told to send mail outs to people's home addresses, and you know, that's not trauma informed. Not everyone wants to get something in their mail about the Mohawk Institute or the search for missing kids and murdered children at an institute that operated for 136 years. So everything we do, we're trying to be cautious that everyone's at a different stage in their healing. Every family's at a different stage of their healing. Every community's at a different stage of healing. So we want to be careful not to inundate people with information that they don't necessarily want to have. Another guiding principle that the survivors established was that it needed to be community involved. When I go on and talk a bit about the search that we're doing, community involved to this group of survivors is that we are not bringing in outside institutions to do the work. Six Nations is doing the work within the community. We have trained community members on the ground penetrating radar machines. We are using Six Nations police services, the police service at Six Nations. We are hiring all Six Nations community members to do the work and really trying to create a legacy and capacity within the community. We understand not every community can do this, but Six Nations is a very large community with over 28,000 citizens. And so there is a lot of people in the community that want to do this work. And it's taking us a little bit longer than some communities because we are doing it from within and not sort of answering those calls from universities and companies that do GPR that say they'll come in and do it for us. And you know, you can appreciate that there has to be confidence in the process, and we don't want to be having this conversation 10 years from now where community would say, well, we didn't do this, and we didn't really trust the people that did it, or you know, we didn't do that part of the area, and so now we have to do it over again. So we're trying to build some confidence in the community with what is happening around the search of the grounds. For all the lawyers or lawyers to be, the survivors have also said that the work needs to be supported by Haudenosaunee law and legal principles. And we get asked this question a lot too. When we say Haudenosaunee law, what does that mean for Anishinaabe law? Because we have a lot of communities that had their kids apprehended to the Mohawk Institute that are from Anishinaabe communities. And you know, for the good work that you're probably learning about now in school, Indigenous law and Haudenosaunee law and Anishinaabe law have mechanisms within to resolve conflict between laws. And so when we say that the work is being supported by Haudenosaunee law, that does not mean it's excluding Anishinaabe law or Anishinaabe culture. It actually, that we have principles and mechanisms within our legal orders as Haudenosaunee people that incorporate and work with other First Nation laws that would apply to the work that we're doing. And then, sorry, I didn't mean to switch that. The last guiding principle that the survivors identified was respect for nationhood and nation-to-nation diplomacy. It's very challenging because we're working with so many different communities that all have an impact, are all impacted by what happened at the Mohawk Institute. And it's really important that we respect that nationhood and communicate with the leadership in the other communities. At Six Nations, the elected council have decided that we need to make the work of searching for the missing children apolitical. And so between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Six Nations Elected Council, the survivors are trying to be peacemakers between the two councils to make sure that everyone in the community comes together to support this work. And we have to rely on our leadership, both the traditional council and the elected council, to help us with this nation-to-nation diplomacy that we have to do and respect the other communities that are also wanting to find their missing children. Having determined their guiding principles, the survivors then turned to what the mandate of the Secretariat would be. And this slide identifies the key areas, and I'm going to speak to each of them in more detail. So there's obviously the thing that everyone is most watching closely is the coordinating the death investigation that is happening. And then we're also mandated to gather statements from survivors and from community members to oversee research and collect documents, and obviously to communicate out the work that we're doing to leadership and the broader community. This is you can go to our website. This is all on our website as well. This is just a sort of a graphic of the area that we need to search. We used to say 500 acres, but as we get records, that acreage is increasing. And so we're up to 600 acres now of grounds that were associated with the Mohawk Institute. And you can see the different parcels of land that were farmed by the children. The kids were forced to farm these lands, as you all know. You can see on this slide where the institutional building was, and then all the grounds around the building where the kids were required to work. We also have, like many of the schools, have waterways that we have to search. Behind the Mohawk Chapel, the Mohawk Institute, there was a canal and the Mohawk Lake. And we've heard from survivors of kids drowning in the waterways. We've heard some really horrific stories about rifle ranges and children being shot on the side of the waterway and being tossed into the waters. So we are actually working to search the canal and the lake this spring as soon as we're able, and we're getting close because the weather's starting to warm up now. The other thing that we have, like many of the Indian residential schools, is we have a church. It's called the Mohawk Chapel. It is the oldest church in Ontario, and it's down the street from the current Mohawk Institute, and it's actually where the old Mohawk Institute used to be, right next to it. And there was what was called the Mohawk Village. And there is a known cemetery there. Many of the headstones are gone now. And nobody knows the full extent of how many people are buried at the Mohawk Chapel. And so we're working now to put a plan in place for the spring to start searching those grounds as well. We have learned that one of the rifle ranges, and there are 3, was also behind there was one behind the Mohawk Chapel. So like that announcement that we heard yesterday coming out of Alberta, we know there are children buried at the Mohawk Chapel. We have some names of children buried at the chapel. We just don't know how many children are actually buried at the chapel. And so that's another part of the work that we have to do. So I mentioned the rifle ranges. Here's a photograph of the kids with rifles. The thing that is, the Truth and Reconciliation wrote about how there were a lot of cadet programs that were operated in Indian residential schools, and the Mohawk Chapel had one of those cadet programs. But what it also had was down the street was an Army base, Army base number 5, so there were a lot of military type people that were associated with the Mohawk Chapel. As I said, we've now since learned through our records that there were rifle ranges that were set up on the grounds of the residential school and the church. And we've heard from survivors of children being shot at the rifle range. And so we've been trying to sort of find where those ranges are. And as I said, we've found 3 of them. And we will be searching those grounds in the spring where those rifle ranges are. There's a company that was called the Dufferin Rifles that were the local rifle company, if you will, that was actually quite intersected with the Mohawk Institute and the principal back in the 40s. So we'll see what that tells us once we get their archival records that we're trying to get out of Canada to see more information about that. So the death investigation. We call it a death investigation and not just a search for unmarked burials. The survivors back in the summer held a press conference where they actually wrote a letter of complaint and hand delivered it to the Ontario Provincial Police, the Six Nations Police Service, and the Brantford City Police, where they said, we want you to do a death investigation. If these were white children, the police would be here in a second doing an investigation. Why is this any different? And so that letter launched the creation of a multi-jurisdictional police task force. We are the only community in Canada right now that has a police task force investigating in relation to the unmarked burials and missing children. You know, I get this question all the time. Why would you invite these police services in? I can tell you the Ontario Provincial Police and the Brantford City Police had their hands all over the Mohawk Institute. There are many records where they were collecting children that ran away and bringing them back to the Institute. We have many records of these police services charging children for stealing apples out of the apple orchard, for stealing money from you know, a teacher, or going into town and stealing food out of you know, a corner store and being charged. And we have many records of failed police investigations where complaints were filed by family members about the treatment of their children in the Mohawk Institute, and the police doing nothing. So why would we invite these police services that we have no trust in to do this work? And you know, that was a really important conversation that the survivors had. And there's a couple of things that I would say that's a bit unique about this task force. One is that we have the Six Nations Police Service. For those that know about First Nations policing, in Ontario and Quebec, we're quite different than Western Canada, because we have what is called standalone police services. You know, First Nations policing came out of the Oka crisis, as you would call it, and the Royal Commission of Aboriginal People. And in Ontario, we have a number of standalone police services, and Six Nations is one of them. The thing that's unique about the Six Nations Police Service versus other First Nations Police Service is it is the only First Nations Police Service that is completely staffed by police officers that are from the community that they're policing. If we look at many of the other standalone First Nation services, the officers are non-Indigenous, or they're from other parts of other First Nations than the ones that they're working with. So there's a little bit of more confidence among the survivors with their own police service, because the chief of police and all the officers are intergenerational survivors of the Mohawk Institute. They all have family members that were apprehended and taken to the Mohawk Institute. The Brantford Police also was heavily involved in residential school, but there's some confidence in that police service as well, because the chief of police of the Brantford Municipal Police Service is a Mohawk man from Six Nations and an intergenerational survivor. So the survivors know that he wants to do the right thing. Obviously, you'd have to talk to him, but I think he's having some challenges with his police services board around resources to put towards the task force. You know, that it makes it a more of a unique situation than we would see in some of the other communities that are doing this work. And then, you know, the Ontario Provincial Police, this is what we say about them. They got invited in because they have money and resources. But just as easily as they were invited in, we can kick them out. And let me tell you, we sometimes are very close to kicking them out. They're not easy to work with. They have no idea about Haudenosaunee or Anishinaabe law. They don't know how to change the way that they work. They, of course, are trying to, or they say they're trying to, but they're very uncomfortable with what we're trying to make them do. And so, you know, if I could undo everything that's been done to date, I would probably kick the OPP out, and I would bring in, you know, try and bring in Ganawagi Police Service and Tyendinaga Police Service and Anishinaabe Police Service, and put an all First Nations police task force together and kick out the other services. But, you know, we're not there yet. But the survivors have said to get some confidence in this police investigation, we're going to put some monitors. And so we've created the Indigenous Human Rights Monitor position, and we have a Haudenosaunee member of Six Nations who is that monitor. Her name is Dr. Beverly Jacobs. Many of you may know her. She was the president of the Native Women's Association. She was the associate dean of the law school at Windsor, and now she's a special advisor to the president of the university. Lots of confidence in her ability to monitor this police task force. And then we've put cultural monitors in place, both Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe cultural monitors, to monitor what the police are doing, to make sure that they are not breaking or breaching any cultural protocols. This photograph here, this is John Elliott. He's 84. He's pushing our smart card here. We have two ground penetrating radar machines that we've purchased. We've trained community members on how to use the machines, including the Six Nations Police Service officers. This was a day where we were part of the training is you go out and you practice, and this was one of the practice runs. And the survivors, of course, they come to the grounds all the time. And I tell people we're not making the 84-year-olds do the search, but if they want to do the search, you get off the machine and you let them push the machine if they want to. And so this was John on that day trying it out, really interested in seeing, he was really interested in seeing the images that come up on the screen to see what we're actually seeing. So I just want to talk about the Indigenous Human Rights Monitor, because you know, you're all law students and you're probably very interested in this part of the work that we're doing. The idea of having a monitor is loosely based on what happened in Quebec in Val d'Or. Some of you may recall that in Val d'Or, a number of Indigenous women came forward and said that they had been sexually abused by the Val d'Or Police Service. And there was a police investigation that took place, and part of that police investigation had put a monitor, a human rights monitor, to oversee it. So what we did at the Secretary is we actually got the mandate of that human rights monitor and read her final report that sort of identified the lessons learned, if you will. And we took it a step further and really indigenized the position. You would never have known reading the one from Val-d'Or that this was dealing with Indigenous victims, that police investigation. And so what we've done is we've assigned and asked Dr. Jacobs to monitor the police to make sure that Haudenosaunee legal principles are being applied and respected, to ensure that the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People are being adhered to by the police services, and also human rights legislation and the Victim Bill of Rights, to make sure that those are all complied with. We had to actually train there's about 24 police officers on the task force. We did training with them about Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe law, about the UN Declaration, about the Bill of Rights, and it's an ongoing process. I'm not going to lie about that. Teaching them what these principles mean and what it means to comply with Haudenosaunee legal principles. But Dr. Jacobs is monitoring everything that these 24 officers are doing in relation to the work. She has a number of powers in the mandate. She can review any document or information that the task force has. Obviously, she's bound by confidentiality and privilege and things like that, but she can actually see any records that they've obtained pursuant to any warrants, and she can also review any transcripts of survivors or anyone that's come forward to speak to the task force. She is also able to go to any location of the investigation and be on the grounds. If you were to do a Google search of the work we're doing, you'll see that we did find remains in Brantford that were early on, and we didn't disclose the location, but it was close enough to our impacted area that there were some concerns because it was the remains of a child. It is an Indigenous child, and there was some history on the lands where the body was found that screamed this is connected to the Mohawk Institute. And so Dr. Jacobs had full access to that site, to the excavation, and viewing it as the coroner investigation and the police investigation was happening. And in her mandate document as well, we're going to be posting it, by the way, publicly. The final version finally got approved a couple of weeks ago, and we're putting it on our website because a number of people have been asking to see the full document. There's also a process to escalate her issues that she may see and how to correct them with the police task force. And so it's a quite unique monitoring process that we've put in place. Ultimately, if she can't resolve issues with the police task force, she then comes to the Secretariat and to the survivors, and the survivors will resolve the issue. So the police task force knows they better resolve the issue before it gets to the survivors, or they'll be in big trouble. So just going back to the other areas of the mandate, statement gathering, the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation tells me they only have 28 statements from Mohawk Institute survivors. I put a request in for those statements in August. Still haven't gotten them, even though they're public statements. So, we could say that they're underfunded and under-resourced, and they are not able to keep up with the requests that are coming in from communities. And it's actually disturbing, as someone who worked at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and was involved in setting up the National Center. I am very concerned that it being housed in a university has done nothing to further what the mandate was supposed to be of the National Center. And I hate to say that because I know they're working really hard, but it's very bureaucratic. It takes forever to get anything done. And it has not become the community archive that it was meant to be. We can't even get 28 statements out of them. you know, how many months later, where we've put in our proactive disclosure requests. So it's troubling. We're collecting statements from survivors. We've also, the task force has a tip line for people to speak directly to the police. And obviously COVID has impeded our ability to gather statements in the way that we would like to, you know, with proper ceremony and gatherings, but we are doing the best that we can in the times that we're in. Documents, I'm sure you hear about the Pope and the documents that are at the Vatican. The Mohawk Institute was an Anglican-run institute, and also run by what's called the New England Company. There are a number of residential schools that the New England Company was involved in. They were in Europe, and there are archives of the New England Company that we don't have access to right now, that we're trying to get, that are in Europe, in London, and also in Pennsylvania, because they operated some Indian boarding schools down on the state side. The National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, we're given about 5 million records from the TRC. Again, just to talk about how under-resourced they are, only about 1 million of those records of the 5 million are currently available online. And that's because they haven't worked their way through them to do the privacy reviews. When we look at the 1 million records that are available online, for our purposes, there's only 425 that relate to the Mohawk Institute, but we know that there's over 12,000. So we are in the process of entering a memorandum of agreement to get access to the over 12,000 records. We have a research team ready to get in there. Again, another slow process. That MOA has been in negotiations since August, and we have not signed it yet. There's a lot of communities in the queue waiting to get these agreements, and you know, every day I'm talking to other communities that are in the same situation. So what do these records tell us? On this slide, you'll see an example of a quarterly return. These are reports that the principal was required to send to Canada, where they list the name of the student and what community they're from and when they were in the school. So there's, you know, these admission records, there's photographs, maps, plans, all kinds of information that will help in the work that the Secretariat is doing. I can't see what time it is. Am I just want to make sure I'm not running out of time here. I always like to remind people, and I hope people have looked at the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement. Under the settlement agreement, when the under Schedule N, that was the mandate of the TRC, and only the federal government and the church entities were required to provide records to the TRC. And so there is this whole body of other records that are out there that people were not required to give to the TRC. So on the slide, I just list some of those other records. In our province, the Ontario Archive has an enormous amount of records that can assist us in the work that we're doing. The Mohawk Institute is a pre-Confederation school. It operated for, you know, in the province of Ontario. Canada had entered into agreements with the province, with the Ministry of Education, to do the inspections of the schools. So there's those records. There's records around the Indian hospital. We too had an Indian hospital at Six Nations called the Lady Wilmington Hospital, and many kids were taken to that hospital, and we don't know what happens to them from the hospital. As I said, there's the New England Company records that we have to get out of Europe. There's university records. I say this many times. I tried to get a lot of records from universities. U of A has some records, I'm sure, related to Indian residential school. We know McGill does. We suspect U of T does. There were medical experiments that were done in the schools, as everybody knows. And there was a committee that was brought together mostly of professors in the medical departments of universities that worked with Canada on, what's the great next big experiment that we can do on these kids. And so there are records, and I always encourage universities to look in your own archives to see what you may be holding on to. And for us, because we're in the city of Brantford, by the city of Brantford, we know that the Brantford municipality and the municipal police also have quite a number of records that are important for us to gather. So we have a long process ahead of us in record collecting. Getting the records from the National Center will be great, but we think that the untold history is sitting in these other archives that we need to get to. So I talked about impacted communities. This is on our website. This is sort of a map of all the different communities that we know had kids taken and brought to the Mohawk Institute. This map, I think, has 20 on it, maybe 21. We're up to 25 now. We're actually revising this when we launch our new website, where we're actually as we create our student list through the records, we are identifying what communities they came from, and you'll be able to scroll over the community and it'll tell you the number of kids that we were able to determine were taken to the Mohawk Institute. So we're currently working on that. And it's really important that we communicate with survivors and leadership in those communities about the work we're doing and consult with them around protocols when we get to that point where we have to go out there and say what our findings are and whether we are going to do repatriation of remains and what ceremonies that we need to take and do throughout the process. And so I'm just going to end here with our logo. So the survivors met with an artist at Six Nations, and he said to them, what do you want in your logo? What do you want to see in your logo? And of course, they threw all kinds of things at him, and he came back and with a draft of a logo. And you'll see the picture of a mother with her child, and the image of the woman facing east is sort of the future and looking to a future ahead of revitalization and reclamation and resurgence. And behind her is the Mohawk Institute. You'll see the red apples around the woman's face, and we are working on a story around the apple orchard. Like many schools, there was an apple orchard at the Mohawk Institute. Those trees actually rotted and were taken down. We're replanting the apple orchard because every survivor talks about how the kids escaped the schools and snuck out at nighttime. And the girls actually would go out from the third floor and climb down the wall. It's amazing, like Spider-Man, climb down the wall, run out to steal apples from the apple orchard and bring them back in for the younger kids to feed them. We want to tell that story of just survival of the children. And we've heard similar, when I was at the TRC, we heard many similar stories around the apples and other berries and farmland and food in the farm that the kids were required to work on but never actually were allowed to eat the food, and how they would steal that food. So it's a really important piece of the experience of the children that all the survivors talk about it at the Mohawk Institute. So they wanted to include that in their logo. So I'm going to stop there because I see there's lots of I'm not reading the chats that are coming, but I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'll just open it up for questions, because I know that's a lot of information and trying to get through it all. But there's a lot of work going on, and I really appreciate everyone taking interest in the work of the Survivor Secretariat. So now I go.
Hi, thank you so much, Kim, for sharing that. We learned so much.
We did, we really did, and it's fitting. Just just here within Treaty 8 territory, in Gruard, they've recently just found some graves, and it's happening within our territories up here, and it's sometimes it's surreal, it's like, but yet you were told, our kukum and our Muslims used to tell us, like, yeah, this is what happened, and so it's all coming to the surface now, and it's a heavy topic. It's it's really, it hits you in the heart. Those are your Japans and your ancestors, and it's so we thank you for sharing that with us. And I was telling Hero, that's amazing what you guys are doing up in Manitoba, right? Where? Sorry,
Ontario, Six Nations.
Ontario. I meant Ontario.
The Halaman track.
Yeah. Well, I knew East, but yeah, and just hearing that you guys are using, your people, the people from the community, we're learning about relationships and how important it is to have, our own people doing these things, right? Like it's that much more, I don't know the word, but it instead of having other people coming in, right? So that's amazing, and thank you for sharing that with us.
I did forget to mention, so this is what happens when I don't write notes and I just wing it off the top of my head. The survivors actually just approved, we're purchasing our third ground penetrating radar machine, and we're creating a employment program for young people in the summer. So we're hiring 10 young people from the community, and we're training them on the ground penetrating radar machine, so that they'll be participating in the search of the grounds. And when I say young people, I don't mean 12-year-olds, young adults, and it'll be a summer employment opportunity for them, and they'll get to interact and talk to the survivors, because as I said, the survivors are on the ground every day when we're doing the search. We set up a tent for them, and we have Timmy's and we have a coffee and tea, and they sit there and they talk to everyone that's working on the grounds. And so it's a real good opportunity to connect the generations together, and so they just approved that, so we're putting that together for starting in May.
Wow, that's amazing, right? Because it gives that relationship, like it happened. This is what happened to First Nations people, and we can't hide from it, or it's in front of us. And so just giving the young people that opportunity to sit with the survivors is that much more the learning and the importance, and that, yeah, that's what happened to our people, and it wasn't just this, world of whatever, like it happened, and it's our reality, and yeah, wow.
And we want to honor everyone who has taken the time to be here. We know there are people from Treaty 8.
Yes, so shout out to Big Stone Child Services, from back home, from Treaty 8, from Wabi. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Saray. They actually they gathered their the people that work, their co-workers, and they provided lunch for them to come and sit and listen. So yeah, it's wonderful, and it's like yeah, hero, and just shout out, thank you.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
We're really it's an honor to connect you to Kim and vice versa. And we know there are people who are doing this work and thinking about this work. And
Yes, absolutely.
so
Yeah.
One of the
one of the things that is really important is that all the communities, we really need to talk to each other. I'm going to give you an example. I've been fighting with the province, like fight with everyone, but I was fighting with the province of Ontario to get access to records. And I had said to the chief coroner, that list on the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation's website where it has the memorial in it, named 48 children that we know died at the Mohawk Institute. That was what the TRC had found. I said, we know they died, but we don't know where they're buried. So could you go find out if there's a death certificate for that child? Because, death certificates are provincial jurisdiction. And so we asked him that in August. And he never gave me the records. And I was speaking to a community here, the Chippewas of the Thames, who are doing the search of the Mount Elgin School. It's just sort of down the road from Six Nations for those that aren't from this area. And they had a death certificate to share with me of a child from Six Nations that died at Mount Elgin. And I said, where'd you get the death certificate? And he told me he got it on ancestry.com. And I went, am I an idiot? So I went on ancestry.com. I was able to find 44 of the 48 death certificates of those children. And the coroner is sitting there for the province of Ontario, has had those records in his possession since September and still hasn't given them to us. This idea of information is power. I do not know what's wrong with the government, and this idea that they have to hold on to everything, just give the records to us. And so the survivors of Six Nations have said, we want data sovereignty. And we've told the National Center, we're coming for the records, not just to look at them. We want to take ownership of the records. And we're working with a company called Anamiki, which is an Indigenous data sovereignty company that is going to create specialized software that will implement Haudenosaunee law and the Anishinaabe law in how that data is preserved and accessed according to our ways. And no more with the colonial laws stopping us from getting our information. So anyways, that's a whole nother lunch hour.
We'll have to have you, I was going to say, we'll have to have you back to do another session, session on that. Yep. We did have a question. Someone was wondering some of the websites that you mentioned earlier. Is there a place that people can find them or access them?
Sorry, the website, there's our website for the Survivor Secretariat. So it's survivorssecretariat.ca. So it's survivors plural. The National Center for Truth and Reconciliation is National Center of Truth and Reconciliation, NCTR. .ca. That you can go on that data, you can go into the archives and search. So the other thing, I think the National Center is trying to get more information out into the community. When I get calls from other locations that are just starting this work, I always say, the first thing you need to do is get the school narrative, it's called. Every school has a school narrative. It talks about the history of the school, the grounds, the maps, and it references documents that exist that are all housed at the National Center. And people can try and get those documents out of the National Center. But get in line, get in the queue.
Thank you. We had another question. Since we're here at the Wakothman Law and Governance Lodge at the University of Alberta, so making some space for more learning about Indigenous law. Yes, hi Hadley, and thank you for sharing those resources. We really appreciate it.
Hi Kim, it's nice to see you.
Nice to see you. I gotta write a paper about this Haudenosaunee law one day.
Yes,
I was gonna say
we'll talk.
This is my Hadley inspired question of you threaded Haudenosaunee, I'm not pronouncing that right, but Haudenosaunee law through your presentation and talked about how you're using that in practice to inform your work and asking others to follow that law in your work. Can you talk more about how you do that and what that means and sort of that connecting law and community work?
Yeah, so I mean, there's I mean, it's like I said, that's like a whole hour at least. But you know, when we did the training for the police officers, you know, some of the things that Dr. Jacobs really embedded in them are a number of the Haudenosaunee legal principles and teachings that are very similar across nations. Around our like grandfather teachings, you know, or grandmother teachings, or you know, every community calls them different things, and you know, and how do you embed sort of respect and humility and love into the work that you're doing? Those are concepts and principles that police officers do not get trained on. And so what does that mean for this type of work that we're doing? But then there's also, you know, the connection to the land and to ceremony and customs around how we approach the land. I'm going to give you a good example. You know, we were told by the traditional people, you know, you got to do ceremony. Obviously, we know that. As Indigenous people, we know there's ceremony. We have to do ceremony. What are the right ceremonies? And so, you know, we worked with the traditional people, and we did some ceremonies, brought the task force together, brought the survivors together on the ground. COVID meant we couldn't bring the whole community together for the ceremony, but we did those tobacco burning ceremonies that are the practice of Haudenosaunee people. And then before we started our ground search, we were planning this press conference, and you know, we had everyone coming. We had people on the ground that weekend before the press conference, traditional people that said, you need to do a feast. We need to do a feast. The children are going to interrupt the press conference. Like was the message they were getting. And so we're like, oh, okay, let's do it. So we, you know, put a feast. We did a feast that weekend. Again, it was all quiet. Like it's not something we announce and, you know, and do publicly. And then on that day of the press conference, we have 2 ground penetrating radar machines on the ground. One of them kept breaking. It kept stopping and wasn't working. And then in the museum, which is beside the Mohawk Institute, where everyone was going to use the washroom, because we had 100 of people there, every single toilet broke down. Like every single one backed up, both on the men's and the women's. And so the elders said, that's the children. That's the children. They want to be heard and they want to be seen. And so what it meant was that we had to open up the Mohawk Institute, the school, the old residential school, and make people, the reporters, go down into the basement, which is where they had the fight room, and walk by that fight room for them to be able to use the washroom. And so the traditional people said, that's those kids wanting people to actually go in that building and feel their spirits and feel what they had to live through. And so, you know, so all that, like the connection to the land and the culture and the ceremonies that we have to do and we keep doing are part of sort of the principles that we have to abide by and work with the different, you know, 6 nations has 6 nations, right? So there's different ceremonies for each of the nations that have to be done and respected.